collecting when I come. And when I arrive, I will send those whom you accredit by letter to carry your gift to Jerusalem. If it seems advisable that I should go also, they will accompany me. And so he's saying, look, you're already gathering together on the first day of the week, right? Presumably to worship, to partake of the Lord's Supper, which he's already talked about in this letter. You're already gathering together. Why not use that as an opportunity to take up a collection? That is, by the way, why we take up a collection on Sundays is, well, that's just what we see. We're already together. It would not make sense to try and create some separate time to do this, or some separate day. I shouldn't say separate time, because we do make a point of saying separate and apart from the Lord's Supper. We're right. But we're already together. It just makes sense to go ahead and do it this way. But there's also a precedent here of taking up a collection to help out other Christians, right? Right? Those in Jerusalem need help. Those in Jerusalem need financial aid. And so Paul says, hey, well, if you'll take up a collection, I'll be sure it gets there. I'll go with them. I'll go with the people you send to be sure the money gets there. If it seems advisable that I should go also, they will accompany me. And so there's this transparency here, right? And I mentioned this last week. I'm wary of churches that keep their finances a little too close to the chest. I think it's very important, by the way, this is just me personally going on. I think it's pretty important that we have something publicly displayed that demonstrates how much money we take in as a congregation. Right? I think it's pretty important that you can easily get a copy of the church budget as well as the church profit and loss report, because money is one of those things where if something happens, right, if there's something that isn't above board, it can tank a congregation's reputation pretty quickly. It can tank an individual's reputation pretty quickly. And so having some transparency there matters, and that's what Paul is offering here, right? Verse 3, he says, I will send those whom you accredit by letter to carry your gift to Jerusalem, right? These are good, honorable people who we are sending. They are bringing this amount to you in Jerusalem. And look, if you want me to go with them, or if it seems advisable, right, that I should go, I'll go too, right? But we're going to do this in a way that makes sense for the people who are receiving it to know that they're receiving what they're supposed to receive, as well as to you to be sure that you can be confident that the money that is meant to go to them goes to them, right? There's no electronic transfer of funds taking place in the first century, right? Nowadays, I can just send money electronically to pretty much anyone, right? There's a few of you in the room who might not have something like that set up, but most of the time, when I need to give someone money, I'm doing it electronically. They don't have that in the first century. They've got to come up with some other way to be sure that the money actually goes to who it's supposed to go to. Verse 5, I'll read verses 5 through 9. I will visit you after passing through Macedonia, for I intend to pass through Macedonia, and perhaps I will stay with you or even spend the winter, so that you may help me on my journey wherever I go. For I do not want to see you now just in passing. I hope to spend some time with you if the Lord permits. But I will stay in Ephesus until Pentecost, for a wide door for effective work is open to me, and there are many adversaries. Okay, so Macedonia. Is Macedonia an important feature of Paul's ministry in the book of Acts? Yes. What happens? Not in Macedonia, but what happens to get him to Macedonia? Okay, so he's accused. What does Paul see? Might be a better way of phrasing it. Remember this? Maybe I'm being too vague. Kelsey accuses me of that from time to time. What gets Paul into Macedonia? Yeah, it's a vision. It's a vision of a Macedonian man. Come over and help us. All right? Come over and help us. He keeps getting rejected as far as trying to go into Asia. That's where he wants to go. But over in Acts chapter 16, beginning in verse 6, right, there's this mention here of how he tries to go into Asia, and the Holy Spirit himself keeps forbidding him. What does that look like? I don't know, but Paul does, and so he says it's the Holy Spirit forbidding him. And then there's this vision of this Macedonian man saying, come over and help us. And so he does. He recognizes, and this is an important principle for anyone involved in the church. Please don't miss this. He recognizes where God is working, and he makes a point to go to that place. He makes a point to join in with what God is already doing. Now, how specifically is God already doing things? At the very least, he notices what's going on in Macedonia. That much is a given. But God is already working in some way. And he recognizes this. Now, in Paul's case, it's miraculous, right? This is a miraculous vision. But there's this language that sort of pervades Paul's writings that we see even a little glimpse of here. I'm going to go where the Lord permits me to go. I'm going to go where the Lord wants me to go. I'm going to do the things that the Lord wants me to do. Sometimes we get so caught up in the things that I think I should be doing for the Lord. And some of them are plain, right? Ephesians chapter 5 and chapter 6 talks about my role as a husband and a father, right? Both of those things are mentioned in those two chapters. Okay, right, that's pretty evident. But sometimes I get caught up in, well, I need to be doing this good work. Maybe it's because I hear about some ministry going on somewhere, maybe locally, maybe abroad, and I go, you know what, I need to be a part of that. And maybe it's a good thing. I'm not suggesting that the work isn't a good thing, but that's not really how I should come to a decision. I should be asking the question, where does God want me? What does God want me to be doing in this situation? That's a different question, and it might lead to a different answer. It might lead to an uncomfortable answer. Because sometimes when I ask that question, it may be a different answer than the thing I want to be doing. I had my mentor, Stan Mitchell, about halfway through my tenure at Fanger, he left to take another pulpit job somewhere else. He wasn't the preacher at Fanger. Earl Edwards was kind of the every Sunday morning preacher. And, Stan's sitting here. He's been preaching for probably about 40 years at the time. He's, working on his PhD, right? His CV would go up against anyone else's. His resume would go up against anyone else's. And he's preaching like twice a month. Loves the congregation, loves the people there. Of course, Kelsey and I do too. We love the people at that congregation. But he ended up leaving, and he sat me down at one point over a cup of coffee, because it was always over a cup of coffee with Stan. And he made a point of saying, I'm not leaving because of you, first of all, which is like, oh, great, thanks. It's not because of the first-year intern. I'm glad to know that. I'm also not leaving because of anything going on at the congregation. I love this congregation dearly. I'm leaving because I need to be doing some work elsewhere. I'm leaving because there's a way that God is going to utilize me better elsewhere, more frequently elsewhere. And indeed he did. He preached for the Red Walnut congregation nearly every Sunday and taught class nearly every Wednesday until his untimely passing. He recognized that he needed to go where he believed that God was calling him to go and do the work that God was calling him to do. Does that mean that it's always going to involve a move? No, I'm not suggesting that. I am simply suggesting we need to be asking better questions. Where does God want me is a pretty good question to ask. What does God want me to be doing is a pretty good question to ask. I will visit you, verse 5, after passing through Macedonia, for I intend to pass through Macedonia. and perhaps I will stay with you or even spend the winter so that you may help me on my journey wherever I go. For I do not want to see you now just in passing. I hope to spend some time with you if the Lord permits. We see very clearly here Paul saying, this is what I want to happen. He's laying it bare. Here's what I would like to see happen. I want to spend some time with you. I want you to help me, right? Which is kind of a weird thing to say until you realize Paul views this through the lens of the opportunity to help someone else as a blessing, right? He's offering a blessing of sorts to the church in Corinth. But it's all colored by this idea that he's only going to do it if the Lord permits, which is to say, if the Lord intends for him to do something else, or if the Lord calls him elsewhere or to some other work, he's going to go. Right? Whatever the plan is, whatever he wants to do, is subjected to what God would have him to do. The same should be true for us today as well. It shouldn't be any different. The Lord may call us to a particular ministry, and we get so set in that ministry, so set in that work. And sometimes because we're so set in that work, while I'm doing this thing, we ignore what the Lord may be calling us to do in some other places, right? Sometimes, and I think I've said this once before in this class, sometimes we serve because we are excited to serve. We believe it is our calling. We believe it is the thing that we want to be doing and we should be doing. And sometimes we serve because it is our turn, right? Sometimes we serve because it is our turn. I'll go back to Fenger for just a second. I am much more comfortable teaching this class than I am a high school class. I want you to know that. High schoolers terrify me a little bit, right? Like we've got a few educated. Is that fair that high schoolers terrify? Yeah, okay. Yeah, they terrify me a little bit. I'm much more comfortable doing this. I taught a class in Fenger to some high schoolers there. We only had 3 or 4. But I taught a class in Fenger to some high schoolers there, not because I felt particularly called to teach the class, in the sense that I was particularly well equipped and I've been working up to this in my ministry, but because it needed doing and I couldn't get it out of my head that, well, if I don't do this, who is? Right? Who's going to step up and do it? Sometimes we serve because it's our turn. Sometimes God calling us to do something doesn't feel like a calling. It feels like, well, if I don't do this, who will? Yes. Mm-hmm.
You can almost see the disciples would love just to sit and enjoy the socialization with Jesus by himself, but he constantly says, the Father's will, that he's on to the next. There's so much work to be done that Paul and Jesus would love to do the socialization. They would love to, dig deeper, to speak. But I just see that parallel between Jesus and Paul. I would love to stay.
Yep. And I think there's an implicit idea here where leaving one work to go to another, be it locationally like what we see, locally like what we see with Paul and Jesus sort of moving from place to place, or maybe it's just responsibility. We've got people here who are involved in particular ministries who may get called away from those ministries to other ministries that are still here. Mind you, it's just something different. Those things, there's an implicit dependence upon God to take care of those things and those people we're involved with when we're no longer involved with them, right? Maybe it's through other people being raised up to take on the role that we once had, right? You think about Paul going from place to place. Paul does a lot of preaching and teaching. That doesn't just stop when Paul leaves, right? Someone else is taking up the mantle, and there's an implicit trust in God that he is going to raise up somebody to do that. It's the same in our local ministries, right? Now, granted, it's not implicit in the sense that I'm going to sit on my hands. Paul has people he's training. He's training Timothy. He's training Titus. He's training others. And we should do the same, which brings me to another tangential point that we can go all the way down the rabbit hole on this and take up the rest of class, but I won't do that. I'll just say this. If you are involved in a ministry, I don't care how long you've been involved in it, and I don't care what specifically it is that you do. You need to be training your replacement, because eventually you're not going to be there, right? For one reason or another, you're not going to be there. You need to be training your replacement, right? And if you say, well, I don't have a ministry that I'm involved in, that needs to change too, right? Whatever that looks like. Okay.
Curiosity because of what you just said. That's why we train the children, boys, start them young so they can take over.
Yep. That's why we train. It's why we get our boys up here leading singing on Wednesday nights. It's why we're involved in programs like LTC, where we get boys and girls trained on doing a bunch of different things. Because eventually, I'm not going to be here. You're not going to be here, right? Sometimes we get so concerned about the future of the church, right? Well, I'm worried about, what the next generation is going to bring, or I'm worried about how things are going to look, or I'm worried we're just not raising up enough young men and women to take on the different responsibilities. If you're worried about that, please recognize you can do something about that right now. Right? You can make a difference right now. And it's not necessarily through some grand program, though I am very thankful for LTC. Studies show that if you're involved in a leadership program like that, LTC, Lads to Leaders, whatever it is, kids are much, much, much more likely to stay faithful once they leave home if they've been a part of that program. But if you're worried about that, you can do that now. Take them visiting. Bring them with you. Have them help prepare a meal. Have them go and say a prayer with someone. Have them go and sing with you. Just whatever it is, right? It doesn't have to be some grand gesture. It can be, in the case of me with my kids, right? I don't have to ask, you're going with me today, right? We're making a delivery. You're going with, but I want to stay here and watch TV. TV will be here later, right? Plus, it gets them away from the Beyblade show, which is horrible. Right? Train your replacement. I don't know what that looks like for you specifically, but work on people. Because eventually we're not going to be here. Paul recognizes this. And part of what he does as he is traveling is he is working on people who can step up and fill the void that he leaves when he leaves. Sometimes we have named individuals like Timothy and Titus. Sometimes those people are unnamed, but it's something he is doing constantly. Verse 8, but I will stay in Ephesus until Pentecost, for a wide door for effective work is open to me, and there are many adversaries. Okay. He's staying in Ephesus. Why? Does he say because he wants to? No. He doesn't. In fact, he's made it pretty clear he'd like to go to Corinth. But he's going to stay in Ephesus for now because there's an opportunity. There's a wide door. And oh, by the way, there are many adversaries. Do you think Paul is writing this just like heel-clicking Pollyanna? Oh boy, look at all the adversaries. Right? That was more Mickey Mouse than Pollyanna, I think. But, right? Do you think that's the approach he's taking? That he's just so excited to be around enemies? Not particularly. Granted, we know from other letters, what's Paul going to do to his enemies? What's he going to do to the people who oppose him? He's going to preach to them, right? That's what he does. But he recognizes that God has opened a door. He also recognizes the door that God has opened is not free of danger. Sometimes we try and judge what God is doing and where God wants us based on the path of least resistance, right? That's not what Paul's doing. He's judging it on the path of greatest opportunity. There is opportunity here to get work done. There is opportunity here in Ephesus because there is a wide door for effective work. He's been there. He knows that there's work to do. And even if it's not the thing he wants to do in the moment, he recognizes it's the thing he needs to do. Questions, comments, rebuttals, kerfuffles? Not a kerfuffle in sight. Somebody please read verses 10 and 11.
When Timothy comes, see that you put him at ease among you, for he is doing the work of the Lord, as I am. So let no one despise him. Help him on his way in peace, until he return to me, for I am speaking to him with brothers.
Thank you. When Timothy comes, put him at ease. Why does he need to be put at ease? He's young, right? There's that language, let no one despise you. Paul actually writes that to Timothy at one point. Let no one despise you for your youth, but be an example. Right? He goes on, talks about that. What else? Perhaps he doesn't want to be there. What else? You ever go somewhere new? Is that easy all the time? I moved around a lot in high school. Here you go. You get the very concise history of my moving. Okay, at least through college. Before I could really remember it, we moved from Antioch, Tennessee to Laverne, Tennessee. This was before I started school. My family were members at Laverne for a while. Laverne is in Rutherford County, just south of Nashville. In third grade, we moved from Laverne to Collierville, which is Shelby County, just to the east of Memphis, same county as Memphis. Hated living there. Least favorite place I lived growing up. In sixth grade, so, like 3 years later, in sixth grade, we moved from Collierville, Tennessee to Swansea, New Hampshire. That was different, right? Swansea, New Hampshire, we were up there about 3 years, sixth grade until middle to end of freshman year, ninth grade. Then we moved from Swansea, New Hampshire to Jefferson City, Missouri. That was different. We lived there about 16 months maybe. And then we moved, just after 10th grade, we moved from Jefferson City, Missouri to Swanee, Georgia, where I would finish out high school, go to Freed Hardeman, meet Kelsey, and the rest is history. Right? It's all history, actually. But, don't need to go on from there. Moved around a lot growing up. It's not fun to go to new places, right? You feel like you don't belong, especially when you sound like I do, except it sounded a little bit more like this, moving up to New Hampshire, and all of a sudden I didn't realize I talked funny until I got up there and found out I talked funny. No, I don't talk funny, all y'all talk funny, but that's just how it goes. It's not easy to go to a new place. Now imagine that for just a second. Not only are you going to a new place, but you've got work to do on the people you are going to. Of course, Timothy needs to be put at ease. This is new, right?
Regret, and did we make the right decision? I didn't know I would feel this way when we did all these things. It's just when you do something new, it's so easy to focus on everything that's going wrong. And be like, well, if we wouldn't have done this, maybe this wouldn't have happened. Just anytime you take on something new, you've got to really, really work hard to find the positives in whatever it is.
Yep. And this is where I think other people where you go to matter a lot. Because if you've got people who recognize that this is very new, very uncomfortable, and hey, something has come up that you weren't expecting that could be considered a setback, that's where people stepping in and going, hey, we're going to help out, right? We're going to help out. We're going to help take care of you. Don't worry about it. I think that's part of what putting someone at ease here is. It's not, oh, go to Timothy and tell him nice things, right? Okay, yeah, don't be a jerk to him, right? I think that's surface level. But like putting someone at ease is when they need help, help them. When Timothy needs help, help him. Take him to lunch. I tell people frequently who aren't a part of this congregation, you may remember if you were here the first year or the first month that we were here, January of 23, we were all here on January 1st, right? We were all here on January 1st, and we stayed straight through services, and Pauls Valley turns into a ghost town on New Year's Day, right? Because there wasn't anything open to eat at. We went and ate at Arby's. After that, basically until they stopped being open on Sundays, someone took us to Pumpkins every single Sunday. Now, us here is relative because you may remember if you were here, somebody in the family other than me was sick every single week in January after that, right? But someone took us to Pumpkins clear through February, basically every single Sunday. You don't understand how much that matters. You don't understand how big of a difference it can make unless you've experienced it yourself. It makes a huge difference. You know, just you see someone come in, they're uncomfortable. They're doing something that God has called them to do and they're uncomfortable. Help them out. Bring them a meal. I'll give you one more example and then we'll move on. When I was at Bridge Creek, March of 2018, I had a week to finish my thesis. I had about 45 to 50 pages of my thesis I had to write that week. My sister and her family were in visiting, and I barely saw them because I spent about 14 hours in my office working on my thesis every day that week. It's spring break for Freed Hardeman. What a spring break I had. I was there every single day, you know, sun up to sundown and then some, working on it. I got it done and, you know, I graduated, yay. But I remember one night I was there late and there was a guy who lived across the street in the duplex. He was a member, very, very quiet, very reserved guy. Not married, no kids, just very quiet, very reserved guy. And he brought me over the biggest steak dinner that I had ever seen in my life, right? And it was rare, and it was wonderful, right? I ate on that thing for a couple of days. I think my mic just died, didn't it? Yep, I've got batteries. It'll be fine. I ate on that thing for a couple of days. I didn't ask for that. I didn't put out a bulletin on social media going, hey, bring me some food, please. I'm hungry. He just brought it over because, as it turns out, people like to eat. Me more than most. And it made a difference. I bet it works now, doesn't it? Yeah, okay. It doesn't have to be some grand thing. Put them at ease. Just help them. And I want to suggest to you that's going to be true for anyone you see striving to do God's work. And sometimes that's, hey, someone moves in and they just need some help, right? Now, I think in a lot of ways we do an okay job of this. My only reminder here is this is not just saying nice, warm things. This is doing things for people to help them out as we can. All righty. Someone please read verses 12 through 14. Thank you. All right. Apollos. Have we seen, I say have we seen, is Apollos mentioned elsewhere in this letter? Where? It's actually mentioned a few times, but the one that sticks out in my mind is all the way back in chapter 1, where some say that they were baptized of Paul, some say that they were baptized of, or that they were followed Cephas, some say they follow Christ, and some say they follow Apollos, probably speaking to who taught them, or at least what school of thought, if you will. But why does he mention this, right? Why mention, I want Apollos to come visit you, but he said, not right now. And his will, depending on your translation, it could mention Apollos' will. It could be that it's God's will, going all the way back to earlier. If the Lord permits or if God permits. Don't know that for sure. But why mention this if he says, well, I'm not going right now? Why bring it up at all? I'm going to offer a suggestion. Early in the writing, there's this division in the church based on who they follow, right? Some follow Apollos, some follow Cephas or Peter, some follow Paul, some follow Christ, right? And there's a lengthier discussion on that back in chapter 1. Paul makes it clear that he wants to send Apollos because the point isn't that they're following these individual teachers, right? They're all pointing to Christ. Christ also points to Christ, by the way. But they're all following Christ. And he is sending Apollos to say, hey, I don't understand why y'all are divided over this when we're not. When the people you are arguing over are working together, you should not be dividing over the people who are working together. Does that make sense? All right. It'd be like someone saying, well, I follow this elder, or I follow that elder. When our elders make a concerted effort to be unified in their decision making, right? You don't hear the elders come out and undermine each other. And so maybe we who submit to them should not be undermining them. That's just one example, right? There's a lot of different ways we could apply this. But he's mentioning Apollos here because, I want him to come to you. I want him to visit with you. Bet he's going to say a bunch of the same things that Paul does. Verses 13 and 14 will be our last two verses this morning. Be watchful, stand firm in the faith, act like men. What does it mean to act like men?
I was looking at this right before you read it again. And it quotes Joshua several times in the Old Testament. And what I kind of took from it, it looks like it just means strong and courageous. Don't be afraid, don't be anxious, don't be worried about all the possible adversaries, to use another word of Paul. Trust in God and have faith.
Yep. So let me ask you this. How do we define courage? Okay. Without fear. Yeah, do the right thing even when you're afraid. Right? It's not don't have fear, it's don't act out of fear. I think there's an important difference there. Right? There are things that I do as a parent that scare me to death. How's my kid going to react? What's he going to do? How's she going to go to sleep because she's up and it's 2 o'clock in the morning and she's on her rocking horse and I don't know how to do this, but I'm scared to death that if I mess something up, she's going to be awake all night. Right? And this is particularly true as far as living out our Christian faith. There are things that we are called to do that in our world today are scary. Can I suggest to you that standing up for a biblical sexual ethic is a scary thing in our world today? Can I suggest to you that publicly proclaiming Jesus as Lord, the Lord, in some circles of the world today is a particularly scary thing? Going back to Joshua in chapter 1, 3 times in Joshua that the Lord tells Joshua as he starts to lead his people, be strong and courageous, and the third time it's be strong and very courageous. And there's mention there, and do not be afraid, right? Because he recognizes the fear there. But it's not simply don't have this intellectual fear. It's don't let that be your guiding light as you act. Don't let that be the thing, in Joshua's case, that leads you in leading the people of Israel. Go ahead.
You know, this is something Kinsey and I talk about a lot, and I find it super helpful in making the right decisions, especially when it comes to decisions of faith. The more you don't want to do something, the more you probably should. And I think our society tells us a lot to, well, follow your heart, follow your instinct. When Paul says the exact don't act out of instinct, and you can use that thought for anything that requires discipline. The more you don't want to do something, the more you probably should.
Yep. Can I get you to read something?
Yeah.
Jeremiah 17:9. And yeah, I had to cheat and look it up because I don't remember everything.
All right, you ready?
I am.
The heart is deceitful above all things and desperately sick. Who can understand it?
Yeah. Follow your heart. It lies to you and it's sick. But sure, follow it. And of course, part of what does help is the more we are transformed by our Savior, a la Romans 12:1 and 2, the more that we start to adopt the mind of Christ from Philippians chapter 2, the easier it becomes to pursue the things that God has called us to pursue, and perhaps even to want the same things that God wants for us. But there's this understanding that sometimes there's going to be a roadblock that comes up to the right thing. I don't know what it is, but oftentimes it is based in fear. Well, if I do this thing, then all of these things could happen. Yep, you're right. What if I, thinking back to Joshua, what if I make the wrong decision as a leader? Other leaders have made the wrong decision, right? Does that mean that they were total failures? In most cases, not over one decision, no. And it's funny in Joshua's case, this is where we'll close. We'll come back to verse 14 later. Later is next week, by the way. In Joshua's case, Joshua is one of the very few leaders in Israel's history, full stop, that actually does a good job from beginning to end, right? You think about David. Where does David fall short? Bathsheba's the big instance. He's also a pretty lousy father, right? Like a really lousy dad. Solomon, well, he gets obsessed with material possessions and women. The history of the kings of Israel and Judah are littered with people with kings who just are horrible at what they do, and even some who do a mostly okay job until the end. Moses doesn't go to the promised land because he implicitly displays a lack of trust when he strikes the rock. Right? Joshua is one of the very few individuals in Scripture who leads well, basically from start to finish, and especially at the finish. Right? Very few leaders in Israel's history finish well. And this was the guy who God has to tell, be strong and courageous 3 times in the opening lines to him in the book named after him. It is not because Joshua was this particularly fearless individual when he got started. It's because he trusted God. And even in the midst of his fear, his concern, his anxiety, he chose to do what God would have him to do over what his fear would have chosen for him. I think there's a valuable lesson in that. Where for us, we may not be leaders in the same sense that Joshua was, but we still have the same types of decisions. Are we going to trust that God's plan is best, or are we going to put our trust somewhere else out of fear for what God's plan could bring in our lives? In reality, we should be trusting in God's plan precisely because of what it brings to our lives. But sometimes we let those external consequences be our guide. Those things that those things that inspire fear in us be our guide. I don't know what that looks like for you individually, but I want to challenge you to consider those areas in your own life. I do the same with mine. I'm not always proud of the reason that I make every choice that I do, but I certainly know at least what should be my guiding light, and it shouldn't be fear. It shouldn't be fear. It should be trust in who God is and what He has done for us and what He continues to do in our lives. Questions, comments, rebuttals, kerfuffles? I finished before the bell. Merry Christmas.